Well, hi again. And yep, it is Unstoppable Mindset time. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate you and we appreciate you listening. Today, we get to chat with Kris Gowen. Kris has a lot of fun things to talk about. I'll tell you, as far as really fun, she is and wants to emphasize a lot during our interview karaoke, and we will, but we'll talk about other things as well. And she'll tell us how she has sung karaoke in all 50 states. And I don't know about the moon yet, but something to look forward to. But Kris, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Thanks so much. And thanks for thanks for inviting me.
Well, so let's start like I usually like to. Tell me a little bit about you growing up, how you started. And well, you started like everybody else. You got born, but growing up and some of those kinds of things and what eventually led you to some of the things that you do.
Yeah, so I grew up in New Jersey to Canadian parents, and most of my relatives live in Canada, split between a couple provinces. So
Where in New Jersey?
Outside of New York City. So
what town?
As opposed
what
town? Mountain Lakes.
Okay, all right.
So
I lived in Westfield for 6 years.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a very tiny little town around it. So it was a sort of good public school system, often used to have, where people would commute to New York City from and yeah, just people working. But yeah, it was small and lovely. But sadly, because it was so small, while I was in high school, there was no drama department until my senior year. But I loved singing. I just loved singing. I can't remember a time where I didn't love singing. And I'm sure, I'm sure at some point it just sort of evolved, but I would sing in the church choir a little bit. And that was like the sort of reason and for me to even go to church early on, because I wasn't really religious, and then would just sing any chance I got and would sing along to the radio and tape songs and sing those and just do all that kind of stuff. And then finally I got a chance to sing I Was Snoopy in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, my senior year in high school, and really liked doing that. And from there, it's, like I said, I just have loved to sing no matter what comes my way.
When I was a freshman in high school, I was in the Glee class. And one of the things that they did was schedule and start doing work to try to get people to appear in Amal and the Night Visitors. And I tried out for it. But the problem was, I said that although I could sing high enough because my voice hadn't changed, I wasn't quite loud enough, so I didn't get the part, darn it, but It was fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Loud has never been my problem. I'm definitely, if anything, it's like trying to tone it down a little bit. So I have the opposite problem that you do when it comes to vocals.
Well, I think the issue really was that a guy would have a hard time in general getting it. So it was a girl who eventually got the part anyway, which wasn't a surprise. It was a little disappointing, but on the other hand, we did go to see it when it was actually performed. And there's nothing like live performances anyway, whether it's even a high school performance or a college, or we actually, when we lived in Mission Viejo, California, my wife and I had neighbors who were Mormons, and they had a number of performances they put on every year. And they did a wonderful job of Oklahoma, and there's just nothing like live performance.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a very good friend here in Portland, Oregon, that is a drama teacher in a high school, and I try to go see as many of their shows as I can, and other friends that perform here and there in certain musical reviews or things like that. And I do love supporting them because they're my friends, and also just because it's super enjoyable to hear the live performances.
We were very fortunate when Jerry Lewis starred as Mr. Applegate, the devil in Damn Yankees. We were living in New York, and it was his only time ever appearing on Broadway. He did a wonderful interview about it, but we got to actually see him, which was really cool.
That's fantastic.
He did a great job. So you went through high school and all that in New Jersey, and then what did you do with your world?
I Went to college in California and discovered I'm much more of a West Coaster than an East Coaster, and did my undergraduate in California, and then I went back east for 3 months to see if I could make it back over there, and I was in New York for a little bit and trying to work in the TV industry, and that didn't work out at all. And so 3 months later, I went back to back to California, and then spent a little bit more time there. And then I went back to the East Coast for a year to get a master's degree, and then I came back to California to get a PhD in child and adolescent development. And then I moved up to Portland, Oregon in 2000, and pretty much have stayed here almost through. I just moved back, actually. I spent a year and a half in Toronto and would like to figure out a way to get back there. So I think that's my flavor of East Coast that I like, ultimately.
Yeah, it's a nice city.
Yeah,
it really I enjoyed spending some time in Toronto. So yeah. What was your major in college?
Communications, film and television. And that's when I learned that I am a horrible filmmaker. And really, I just cannot put together, I can't edit well, I can't do anything. It was just something that I thought I would really love doing, and I did enjoy it, but I was just very bad at it. And so so after you figure that out, when you major in something that you really don't have a lot of skill in, you need to be like, now what do I do? So I managed a bakery for a little while, and then that's when I started then getting my master's degree, and then also my PhD in child and adolescent development for the most part, and started working with youth and young adults, as well as writing for youth and young adults in the sex ed world. And so that's where I really got a stronghold there. But I started using my research and my research skills more broadly to support community-based organizations in their program evaluation efforts. I mean, this is kind of nerdy and boring, but I love it. I really love using data in ways that are really applied and that are accessible to whoever wants to know the numbers and things like that. And it can be a pretty big challenge, and I really love it.
So even though you like to sing and so on, you didn't decide to try to go off and do music as a study and as a possible major, huh?
It really never occurred to me that would be an option. I never really felt and saw myself as a good singer, I'd say, until just the last couple of years. So I, would audition for things. I wouldn't necessarily get parts. I still love to sing, so I would still sing. I knew I wasn't awful, but I never really saw any form of musical career being a possibility, really at all. So, thank goodness for places like karaoke where, one of the reasons I love it is because it's got so much unexpectedness in it. And another reason is it's such a supportive community. Like, it's one of the few places that you can do like awful at and people will still completely cheer you.
Yeah. So. And there's no pressure.
No.
Which is cool. I was telling someone yesterday, we were listening to Jo Stafford. You know who she is or was. She was a singer in the 40s and 50s and had perfect pitch.
Yeah.
And you talk about doing bad. Jo Stafford recorded a whole album once where she sang a half a note off key just to prove she could. And so the whole album is her a half note off key because she had perfect pitch to be able to do that.
Right.
And
it is very hard to sing purposely off key when you've got all this music happening around you and it just sounds so wrong.
Yeah. It came out all right. The album was, I don't know how much it sold. It was fairly popular, as I recall. I just heard about it having been done, but I believe, as I recall, that it was popular enough because it was Jo Stafford too, who was a pretty famous person back in singing in the 50s and so on. Probably her most famous song was the song "You Belong to Me," see the pyramids along the Nile and all that. And she was the main person, or the person who's made that song most famous, although a lot of other people have done it. But what got you into, well, first of all, where did you go to school in California?
I went to school at Stanford,
Oh, okay.
both for my undergraduate and my PhD.
Oh, cool. Couldn't stay away from the football team, huh? From the Cardinal.
Right? I know. And I know with Shaw being no longer being the coach. Yeah, no, so there was, I mean, when I was there, actually Stanford did have a couple stints of doing okay, but for the most part, it was definitely not some of Stanford's glory years when I was on campus.
No, but it's a wonderful school.
Yeah. I was just back there like a couple months ago, and barely recognizing it as everything grows. But yeah, so decided that California, and again, like I said, the West Coast was really for me, and so I've spent a little bit of time both in California and Oregon.
So what got you into child development and deciding to do that as a career and as a major?
Well, yeah, so so I had my failed attempt at trying to be in the television world. And so, tail between my legs, I went back to California where my social circle was, like my support network, and I managed a bakery, and just to make ends meet and just sort of regroup. And this was during the era where there was a lot of debate on condoms, whether they should be in schools or not, and the science, like any research study, basically said that if you provide condoms in schools, it does not increase the rate of engaging in sexual activities among kids, but it does increase safer sex practices. So I knew this literature and I knew the research because, well, I'll back up a little bit, but Congress and other politicians were basically ignoring the science and just making laws that had nothing to do with anything grounded in evidence. And I just got very annoyed with that. I would throw socks at the television anytime there was like a newscast about it. And I was like, that does it. I'm going to go back to school and get fancy letters after my name so I can write curricula and do these things. And so related to that was really, I went into film and television because I wanted to make documentaries from the standpoint, like from the viewpoint of youth. I wanted to do things about social issues, and that was really what was driving me, because I really felt like that the whole educational system was teaching us about things that didn't matter, right? Like a very typical adolescent attitude of like, what's the point of learning all of this? This is dumb. We should be learning other things. And so I was like, I know I'm going to make important movies about social issues. And then I learned that I could not make movies at all. So I just took that passion and kind of turned it into something slightly different that still allowed me to focus on issues that matter to youth and young adults.
How about collaborating, however? So you weren't great at making the movies. Did you ever explore collaborating with good movie makers and maybe helping to create the scripts and the topics and all that? Or have you not gotten that far yet?
It's funny because I didn't think of doing that, because I just thought like it was going to be then just really hard to break into, right? So as I was working in television for the 3 months that I worked, it's just like the whole competitiveness and things. And I just didn't really have the good networking skills, and I didn't have those things. And I just really found myself again drawn to, okay, what's the evidence, and how are we gonna create these best practices? And that was really more suited to sort of look into those things, not from a mass media standpoint, but really more from a research standpoint, but then also from supporting these so many programs that are out there that are doing great things.
What comes to mind, though, immediately is, as you were talking about, the politicians go off and do the things they do. They ignore reality and so on. How do we deal with that? I suppose one answer is we got to elect other people, but how do we get enough people to do that we get intelligent people in Congress and so on? But how do we start to truly change the dialogue? Because it gets to be so frustrating when they totally ignore the politics, and they stir up so many people to do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, one one piece of this is like, I can't imagine being a politician in the sense of you have to make decisions about everything. So there's sex ed policy, there's forestry, there's electric cars, there's tax laws, whatever. Like, you're supposed to have an opinion on all these different things. How the heck are you supposed to be an expert in all these things, right?
Well,
then the U.S. is. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, that's, of course, the real issue. Do you really have to have opinions on everything? Or do you use it as an opportunity to learn and then vote based on what you learn? But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, right. But I agree with that would be ideal, but there's only so many hours in the day. If you're literally like trying to figure out how to, and then so the U.S. has lobbyists and then lobbyists have agendas and some are better funded than others. So there's that. And then also you listen to, your constituents because you want to get reelected. And so different moral values and different just values in general are infused into different segments of our population. And so then you start to go the direction that you believe will get you reelected, or you go in the direction of this lobbyist that's giving you the information that you think you need. And maybe it's good information and maybe it's less grounded in evidence. It's so complicated to just sort of say, oh, well, they should just listen to the science. It's like, yeah, but they've got to listen to the science on like 700 topics. And I'm guessing I'm not even exaggerating when it comes to that. And I don't know how that would work.
They do. But in reality, a lot of what goes on with the politicians is really the accomplishments of the staff, and the staff advises them. Yes, the politicians vote, but I guess my point really is, having spent a lot of time around Washington and dealing with Congress and educating them on issues with disabilities and so on, a lot of the time it's really educating the staff or trying to educate the staff. So the staff really controls a lot of what the actual legislator hears and sees. So it still gets back to, they're not necessarily the experts that we might think they are. They rely on staff. And that also means maybe they need to do a little bit better job of hiring smart staff. But as I said, it's also that they oftentimes stir up their constituents, which is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a mess. It's a challenge. I don't envy anybody who does it. I agree with you, but I think also there are more things that we could do to have a more substantive discussion about a lot of stuff. And it seems like we're really losing that opportunity, or at least we're losing the perspective of having meaningful conversations compared to what it used to be like 40 and 50 years ago.
Yeah, yes, there's definitely more of there's lots of explanations. And again, these are sort of, we've all, like, 5 minutes into this podcast, we're launching into like some of this country's biggest challenges. And I definitely don't have answers for them. And I don't think anybody does at this point, because it's not going to be simple. It's so many, different things that are happening that are coming together at a time that is creating, these like strong divides between some types of values. And at the same time, I do think that there are commonalities that are there. It's just that we're very much entrenched right now in, being more drawn to difference than we are to similarity and common ground.
Yeah. And I think that's a theme that a lot of people who think about it get to, which is, we're focusing too much on differences and not commonalities, and finding ways to work together. But you went off and you got your PhD and came back to Stanford to do that. And then what did you do with your life?
I ended up working a little bit I was in, I'm trying to remember, this is a very long time ago. I didn't realize I was going to have to go through my whole biography.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. I just was like, what did I do after that? I was doing some research. I've really always been drawn to not being a traditional academic. So I've been research faculty at a couple of universities. I've worked, like I said, in sort of the nonprofit sector for a little bit. Some of it had to do with youth and young adults. Some of it dealt more with healthcare in general. And so, yeah, just been, going where my passions have taken me. And I really like that that's how I've done things. Sometimes it's frustrating to be like, to look at myself some days and like, why did I just not choose an easy path, or just like, become an academic and stay in a place and just keep going. And I've just sort of learned that that's just not my nature. I just can't stay in one place for too long, whether that's, career ideas or whether it's a physical location. I've just really always been drawn to making sure that what I'm doing matters and making sure what I'm doing supports other people.
Can't do much better than that, huh?
I hope not. I don't know. I mean, also, I just, I know I'm sure there's many ways I can do better, and this is what I got.
Well, that's okay. So
Yeah.
Did you go into teaching, or what did you go into doing?
I did. I taught at Portland State University for a while. I taught human sexuality. I taught women's reproductive health. I taught a handful of other courses, but those were the two main ones. And then I was what's called research faculty. So again, I had a research portfolio that focused on youth and young adults, both in terms of healthy relationships, safer sex, as well as mental health. So I did that. And then I got tired of doing that. And so I took the opportunity to do some traveling for a couple of years, where I was would stay in various countries for several months and explore and really get to know different communities and different cultures, and really appreciated that time. I taught some English and taught some research methods in a couple of different. I taught in Vietnam. I did some tutoring in South Korea. My student teaching was in Vietnam, and then I taught in Oman, which is in the Middle East. And all of that took around not quite 2 years to do that, and then I settled back up to being in an academic institution again in Oregon, and then then the pandemic hit, and so then everything just went sideways. And that's what allowed me to take that time and reflect and decide, I want to move to Toronto at some point in my life. So I got my paperwork in order and went up there and worked there for a little bit. And now I'm back in Oregon, where my social support network is, and I'm doing some consulting work.
So now you're kind of on your own. Have you formed your own company or what?
I do some independent consulting, and then I also work for a large business management consulting firm as well.
What do you do for them?
Some change management work, as well as I'm currently supporting a new artificial intelligence natural language processing tool, which is basically just something that would help people analyze a lot of qualitative data as opposed to doing it all by hand. Because if you've got like a large organization, or if you've got, for example, a large number of tweets or something, and you want to make meaning of them, and there's literally thousands of them, typical qualitative research methods just can't really capture that data with any form of efficiency. So it's an interesting dance between humans and machine to help make the process more efficient. So I'm looking into supporting that work.
Do you use a tool that we would have heard of?
No. Oh. Use a tool that is a proprietary of the organization I'm working for, and we're still in soft launch. So no, I'm not using a tool that anyone else is really. I mean, other than internally, a few of us are being trained up on this to help support its utilization in-house.
I know there's been some discussion over the last few weeks about the stuff that Microsoft is doing to do text analysis and be able to do everything from composing poetry to having conversations with AI.
Yes.
I have not played with that yet, although I guess I should explore it. People have asked me, and I haven't really done that. So that's one of the things that I get to do when I take a little bit of time and don't do interviews for a day or two. But So that's all pretty cool. Well, you've done some writing. You wrote a book, I believe,
Yeah.
on sex education, right?
Yeah, I did. I wrote a book called Making, or that they retitled it. So its first iteration was called Making Sexual Decisions, and then it just became Sexual Decisions. And it's sort of it's a textbook and like a library book for teens. And what made that unique was it really balanced. It was about 50-50 on healthy relationships versus sort of the anatomy and sexual health components. So books tended to either lean towards one or the other. And so I wrote that. And then, like I said, it had a couple additions to it. And then, it becomes sexuality education becomes really outdated very quickly. And so the book is, I think the last iteration of it was 2018, I think was when the last edition of that was really published. But somehow Congress has found it and has put it onto some banned book lists. Because I guess it says things that they don't want it to say. So my friends made me a T-shirt that says, my book was banned and all, kind of thing. Like, all I got is a stinking T-shirt. So yeah, and so I wrote that, and then the other two books that I've written since then, one was about my karaoke journey, and then the other was somewhat related to that, but was looking at the importance of finding joy during times of grief, because the first book about my karaoke journey, singing in all 50 states, was really about me processing the loss of my best friend. And so those books, they're certainly not sequels of each other or anything like that, but there's a tie-in there with the joy that karaoke brings me and how it really, I think, helps my mental health, and just encouraging people to either find joy in karaoke or whatever it is that they can find happiness in during really, really tough times.
Well, I do want to get to that, but another question that you just made me think of is, you said that there have been several iterations of your book on sex education, and they've come out of date very quickly. Why is that? What really causes the shift that makes it go out of date and need to be revised?
I mean, there's a lot of things. Like I'll just give an example. Between the first and the second edition, the HPV vaccine came out, right? So that's a whole thing. And then other ways that we talk about consent. I think, so this is not necessarily in the iterations of my book, but we start, like, when I was in high school and even when I was in college, the idea of consent was very heteronormative. In other words, it was very assumed that it was going to be a boy and a girl negotiating sexual activity, and it was up to the girl to be the gatekeeper to say no. And it was really up to the girl to make sure that that's the way it was. And now we've evolved so much more in our consent language. First of all, we've dissolved, we're working on dissolving the gender binary. We can't assume the genders of the people that are wanting to engage in sexual activity. We can't assume who might be wanting to say no versus another person who might be more interested. And then there's also the concept of teaching kids how to hear a no, and how to make sure they're hearing a yes. So the onus isn't placed on the person who is less interested in engaging in a certain type of activity. So there's so much on that. And then again, sort of talking about the ways we talk about gender identity and sexual orientation evolve very quickly. So if we want to be inclusive and reach all young people in getting, providing them with knowledge, things change really fast.
Do you see other kinds of changes that are coming?
I mean, yes, because gender identity and sexual orientation are still evolving in terms of how we're discussing those things. And I didn't even mention the role of technology and how that's escalating, right? There's always different apps that are being used. There's always different ways to communicate. And what are the most common ways that young youth and young adults prefer to communicate? So all of that is very all of that is continuing to evolve, and I think a lot of that is still evolving. I'm hoping that our conversations about, like I said, consent and gender identity and sexual orientation and just relationship structure and things, I think all of that, I'm really hoping continue to evolve and start to become more gray, as it were, that we don't have these sort of hard and fast rules, but instead really encourage listening and respect and communication and teaching people how to think about what matters to them, and then communicating that and feeling comfortable communicating that to somebody else that they might want to be with.
And accepting the responses that come, whatever they may be.
Exactly. And that's part of the communication and listening piece.
Yeah. Well, so you have been doing all of this, which is great, and you've been doing karaoke. How did you get started originally with karaoke? What made you decide that that was something that would be fun to do?
Well, I mean, it sort of comes back to when I was a kid and just loving to sing no matter what. And so the first time I sang karaoke, I was actually in Arizona. And I don't remember what year this is, but it was sometime in the 90s. But I do remember being in a bar after I was visiting a friend of mine, and we had just played a softball game, and now we're in a bar and there's singing. And it's like, well, wait, what's this magic? I can put a song in and then they're going to call my name and then I get to sing. This is the best thing I've ever heard. Yeah, this is the best thing ever. And then, and that first time was a total disaster. I mean, I picked a song that I picked Hearts Alone, which, first of all, no one wants to hear that in a bar. Like, no one needs to hear that, right? And then I biffed the big note. I mean, it was just a disaster, but I was just super happy about it. I was just like, this is great. And then when I went to get my master's on the East Coast, I didn't know anybody. And so one of the things I did was just sort of became a local at one of the nearby bars, and they had karaoke every Wednesday, I think it was. And so I just went every Wednesday as my chance, and something I always just would look forward to. And I would just be like, I'm going to sing a couple songs, I'm going to be able to do this thing. And you get to see like the same people over and over again. And it's just this wonderful, magical experience. And then, so from there on out, I just started to look for karaoke bars wherever I was, and just kept singing as a key component of my mental health and just general fun.
We bought a timeshare at the Lawrence Welk Resorts in Escondido, California in the early 90s, got a great deal. And they had karaoke on, I think it was Saturday nights. And I'm not sure whether that was the first time I did it, but it probably was. One of the things that they did a couple of times is there were people who came and they did it enough that they actually let them take an hour and do a whole karaoke concert.
Wow. Although hopefully they knew that, because then the people who came just to sing a song or two are like, wait, I have to wait an hour?
Oh, it worked out. Yeah, they always advertised it ahead of time. But also they started earlier, and they actually started like an hour early so people could come to hear the concert, and then the regular karaoke time started at the usual time.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, that sounds perfect.
It was wonderful. And so, and you did, even with the concerts, here's some people who, well, let's just say did better than others.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's okay.
It is. I mean, I love that part of community, and I really think that that's, I've alluded to it before, but karaoke is, yes, of course, I love to sing, and I love, like singing in front of people. I think that adds an extra joy to it for me. I mean, some people, it's their living hell, but, that's okay, because that's what variety in life is for. So I love that aspect. And I love when a person gets called to the microphone and I don't know who that person is and I have no idea what they're going to sing. You can't tell by looking at a person what their song selection is going to be. And like, I just love all of that. And then I love going to a karaoke venue like regularly, and then getting to know those people and just feeling that support and giving that support. to people who are being really brave by just stepping out and singing a song in front of others.
Well, since that first time, have you ever done Hearts Alone again?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And also, anytime now it's sort of funny, anytime I think I'll know a song and then I don't sing it very well, I'm like, that does it. And I like really, I'll focus on it. I can't say that when it comes to, bar karaoke singing, I don't really rehearse per se, but I will like listen to the song a couple of times so I actually, know it.
Know the melody at least. Do you read the words most of the time, or do you try to memorize words ahead of time?
Well, I mean, it's a good question because there's a couple of things. One is I like to do a bunch of new stuff a lot. And so I do enjoy, therefore, being able to read the words and reading the words. And then also, but I do find that oftentimes I then end up using them as a crutch. Like I don't actually need them, but I still look at the screen. And then, however, I've also been dabbling here and there in competitive karaoke. And when you do competitive karaoke, you 100% cannot look at the words. Like you just, you have to engage the audience. You have to be doing that, and there's no looking at words when you're doing that kind of competition.
You have no way to really put the feeling into it that you do if you already know the words, because you're focused on the words. You're not focused on what you need to be focused on, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, your storytelling doesn't get as good. Your your audience connection isn't as good. You can't, I mean, depending on how many monitors are there, but it's also difficult to, go to different parts of the stage to talk to, sort of quote unquote, talk to different people in different parts of the room. So you really need to not be tethered to the screen.
Yeah.
In order to do some of those things to help create a better performance.
I remember once doing karaoke with someone and they wanted to perform a song and I didn't know all the words to it, knew the melody and all that. And actually the operator of the system stood next to me, and because I told him, I don't know all the words. He said, don't worry. And he told me the words far enough in advance that I was able to go ahead and put it together, which was really pretty cool. And actually it came out pretty well. I wish we'd recorded it, but I don't even remember what the song was, but it was fun to be able to do that. But for me, I do memorize and practice before I go, only so that I make sure I really do know all the words, because it's the only way that I'm going to be able to do it successfully. But it makes it a lot more fun to be able to, as you said, connect with the audience in one way or another.
Well, and it's funny too, because I appreciate, you needing to memorize the lyrics in advance. And sometimes the lyrics that show up on the screen are definitely not the right lyrics.
I've heard of that.
You look at them and you're like, that is really not what I think this person's saying. And so, sometimes the lyrics are incorrect in these karaoke tracks. So
yeah, which is another whole issue that one has to deal with. But it still is a lot of fun to do, and I've enjoyed it. What's for you the most rewarding, or the thing you love most about doing karaoke?
I mean, I really do think it's this piece of community that, even if you're only again, when I was going around the US and singing karaoke in all 50 states, wherever I was hanging my hat that night, that was my community for the night. And again, it's a very supportive community, and people are cheering each other, and people will potentially, strike up a conversation with you. And it is when we were talking about the politics stuff at the start of this conversation, you don't know somebody's political affiliation. You don't know, who they go home to at night, if anybody. You just don't know really anything about them, and it's okay. Everyone's united. And I mean, my book's called One Nation Under Song, in part for that reason, because you really do become this community of humans. And there's a lot of magic in that, to then sort of forget about some of the other things that might make you not friends. outside of that setting.
What are some songs that don't make good karaoke songs? Or maybe a better way to put it is, what make the best karaoke songs?
Yeah. So the first one is like if it's super long, if there's a lot of long instrumentals, and then usually, I mean not always, but if it's way too slow. I mean, because most karaoke's done in bars and most karaoke's done late at night, and so the idea of singing something super long with super long instrumentals and slow, like no one wants to, like, people want their turn and people want to like go to a bar to feel probably usually a little peppier. So it's like those things. So, but that said, it's not necessarily the flip side is what makes a good karaoke song. A good karaoke song is the song that's in your heart. Is the song that matters to you, is the song that you want to sing because it is the song you want to sing. Because you can tell when people are singing the song that's bringing them joy, it's you can just tell, and it just becomes a funner performance.
I think I mentioned when we chatted before doing this interview about the time we were at Lawrence Welk, and it was near the end of the night, and one of the servers got up and just started singing from the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, Hard Candy Christmas.
Yes.
And did the most incredible performance of that I think I've ever heard outside of, and maybe is equal to what was in the musical or the movie. But clearly she had sung it before and just did a really wonderful job with it and got a great reaction from the audience.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, some people are going to want to sing the same song over again and have it be very rehearsed, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's what makes that person feel comfortable or the side of them that they want to show. And so I do know people that sing, a very small repertoire of songs, and that's where that's where their comfort is, that's what they want to do. And then I have other friends who are just more like, it's a bar, no one's really listening to me. I just want to sing something that I want to try, or again, that's the song that I was singing to on the radio, and I was like, oh, I want to give it a whirl myself, right? Like there's just sort of those things, and then, every day is a different mood and it's a different time, and so what is the song that's calling to you at that particular time? And that's, when people will turn to me and say, what should I sing? I'm like, well, what were you singing to on the radio the last time you were listening to the radio? Or what did you find yourself singing in the shower the last time? Oh, I was doing this. Well, sing that.
So from a long song standpoint, probably you wouldn't want to go much longer than Don McLean's American Pie, but at least it's a fast tempo song.
Yeah, but American Pie, that's like 7 minutes, right? I mean, there is a radio edit and a karaoke edit of that song, so... But like American Pie, Piano Man's even really long. I mean, sometimes people can get into it, but like if it's over 5 minutes, you're just like,
I
don't know.
It's getting a little bit. It can be a little bit tougher.
Right. There is no hard and fast rule. I mean, mind you, if the bar, there's nobody in that bar, I will bust out Come Sail Away, which breaks all the rules. It's too long. It's got like over a minute instrumental in it, all that stuff. But it's a fun song. And I'm only singing it if there's like a very small rotation of singers. Yeah.
But if people enjoy it, it works.
True.
So how did you get involved in thinking of this idea of singing karaoke in all 50 states? You love to travel, so that gave you a good excuse for doing it. But how'd that all come about?
Yeah, I mean, the slow roll of it was, I think there was just one day that I noticed that I was starting to collect states because I, again, as a former academic, I would go to a lot of conferences. And so sometimes you network in the conferences, and then sometimes you're just sort of like, you know what, I don't want to network in a conference. I want to go out on this. I want to see what St. Louis is like, or I want to see what Tampa, Florida is like. And so you find the karaoke establishment and you go there to get a little like dose of local flavor of a place. And so, I don't know, I had collected maybe 9 or 10 states just sort of doing it that way. And then in 2015, 15, my best friend was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And I had a good year with her, not quite a year, but and when she died, I was like, so she and I used to also sing together a lot, and I just kind of was at a loss, for lack of anything else. Just like I couldn't really imagine a life without her. And so I quit my job and I drove around the country to say, all right, if my goal is to sing karaoke in all 50 states and I'm doing it this weird trickle, when else am I going to get to Oklahoma? When else am I going to do, like, I need to do this. I need to do this as an actual thing. And so I did. I got in my car and I drove over 17,000 miles in 99 days to hit the 48 lower states. I avoided freeways and interstates whenever possible because I wanted to actually see the country. And so when I was done, I had a couple months in between, but then I picked up Alaska and Hawaii to make it all 50.
So you were clearly grieving. How did this really help your grief?
In a lot of different ways, and not intentionally, mind you. I just was following my, to me, I'm like, what is the one thing? I didn't really like my job at the time. I didn't, my relationship situation wasn't great. And so I was like, the one thing that still I could find anything to care about was karaoke. It was the only thing that I cared about. That was it. And so I'm like, all right, well, that's good. I'm finding joy in something. And so again, I got in my car and just took off. And the things that made this trip really good for my grief, I think, were, one, singing really helps emotional processing. It helps you get your feels out. It does all that. There was structure to my days, but not too much of a structure. Like I knew that I woke up in one state and I knew that I needed to get to this other state by a certain time. And I had a lot of alone time. I didn't do the whole trip by myself, but I did a lot of the trip by myself. So I had time in a car to sort of just, again, let myself feel and let myself exist. I was constantly seeing new things, which is another great brain exercise for building resilience, is to experience new things. And yeah, I think this combination of like structured but not too structured, seeing new things, being able to use my emotions and channel them in ways that I enjoy, and finding that like one slice of joy that would help me balance. It just was a very good way for me to just allow myself to experience what I needed to experience.
Rephrase that. Do you think that you benefited more from doing the karaoke, or that you benefited more from doing the travel, spending time alone, having a lot of time to think and process?
I think it's the balance, and I think that's the key to, and so like sort of in my second book, which is Find Your Song, it's the whole concept of that book is balancing moments of joy during times of grief, because we need the balance. Like ultimately, like your body needs a balance, your brain needs a balance, that when you provide yourself with the respite of moments of joy during an awful time of life, you're actually allowing yourself to grieve better. You're allowing your body to have those breaks it physically needs in order to recover, because grief impacts us physically, emotionally, mentally. And so if we're always, quote unquote, in it, like just stuck in the, we do need to be in it sometimes. I mean, not everybody. And I was a person who needed to be in it sometimes, but if I was just always in it, then that would not be good.
What would you advise a person to do, or how would you advise a person who is experiencing grief? What kinds of things would you say to them?
I mean, again, it's like my book almost outlines like a bit of a I'm not going to say a script because there is no script. I think my first chapter is basically like there is no grief script. So if you think, and also if you think, you're like, well, I've lost somebody before or I've grieved before. Yeah, but this is a different person and you're a different person because it's a different time. So you can't be like, oh, I was like this when this happened. Now I'm gonna be the same way. It's just not gonna happen. So your grief and your grief experience in the moment is yours. And so to allow your emotions in, allow them to be, and again, don't be afraid and don't be ashamed if you're experiencing some positive times in amongst the negative, and really being, if you can, being mindful of what are little things you can do to promote self-care and to get the supports that you need. And so if you've got that one like you're like, the only joy I'm getting right now is watching this television show, fine, then go for it. If your joy is karaoke, if it's knitting, if it's making Chinese food, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how silly it seems. It's not silly because it's your being pointing you in a direction of some form of finding a little bit of pleasure in a life where it might be hard and you can't even see any form of pleasure at all, except for quote unquote this stupid thing. And this stupid thing it's not stupid. It's great.
It's what's important for you at the moment. And you're right. There's no reason to think that anything is stupid. What I think is important is thinking about it and internalizing it to the point where you can at some point start to think about, okay, I'm doing this. I'm really enjoying it. I don't want to stop doing it. But how do I also continue then to move forward? I know when my wife passed away last month, in November, I started saying, like a number of people always say, well, you got to move on. And I realized that was the wrong thing to say, because if you move on, to me, it seems like it implies almost that you're possibly forgetting. But what I realized the appropriate thing, at least for me to say, is we do need to move forward, and she would want that.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the language does matter, and everyone's going to resonate with a certain way. So some people, like you're saying, move forward resonated with you. Some people are like move through.
Yep, that works.
You're different. I mean, you're different. You experienced a profound loss, and I'm sorry for your loss. And there is so you are now a different person, and so it's like, okay, who is this new Michael, and how does this new Michael want to navigate through the universe? And for a little while, you might be like, I don't want to navigate through this universe at all. And other people have ideas, because sometimes the grief and the loss is more expected than others. So some people have done some anticipatory grief, or it's like some preparing, and other times the universe does not provide us with that opportunity to sort of think about life without that person.
In this case, it was kind of half and half. I wouldn't say that it was totally unexpected, but not as fast as it occurred. Yeah. And also, no matter how much you expect it, it's really different when it's occurred and now you are actually in a different space, in my case, alone. So there are things I do differently. And sometimes I wonder, why am I doing it differently? And I realize, well, that's because now it's the way it is. So I wake up earlier. I turn the TV on when I get up in the morning, and Karen always used to get up much later than I, so I'd never turn the TV on until I'd go out in the other room and close the door. So a lot of things that are different, but it's also okay.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it will evolve some more over time. But I happen to be a person that likes to continue to move. And I get the joy, I will say, of doing this podcast, which is so much fun. And I get to learn so much, though all of the time that I get to spend with you and others is such an enjoyable thing for me. And it's been that way ever since the beginning of the podcast, but it's so much better even now.
Yeah. And it's it's some connection that you're getting for a little bit of time. It's a project that hopefully isn't too overwhelming for you. And it is these pieces that just help you sort of take take things day to day in that very mindfulness way. Because again, it's not like, there's the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, and there's these other things. And if I look at my, grief journey, if you will, it's really just a big scribble. Like, it's not, because there'll be days. I mean, Molly died in 2016. And so it's been several years since she's been gone. And, for the most part, I function through the day to day. I still think about her every day. There's something in the world that makes me think about her. And then there's sometimes where it's just a gut punch. It's just like it wasn't that long ago at all. And there's other times where doesn't feel that way.
And for me, I don't ever want it to be that long ago. And I will always remember. And I think that it's important. Well, when you're married for 40 years minus 15 days, that's not a surprise.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want that to change. There's so much to remember about her, and all of the wonderful times. The memories will always be here. And that's an important thing.
Yes, definitely.
So then the pandemic hit. You remember that pandemic thing? And
still here.
them little things are crawling all over the place. And you wrote another book.
Yeah. And that's the book that the Find Your Song is where, so I wrote One Nation Under Song as like when I completed that karaoke journey. And then I never really had the intention of writing a book from it. I just got back and I was like, I'm not done. And so like that book just sort of came forward, and I worked on it that way. And then during the pandemic, I wish I could remember. I'm sure it's brain fog or whatever have you, or just the COVID time messiness. But like, I just noticed that like I was grieving, the world was grieving. The two things that really bring me or the three things that bring me joy: karaoke, can't do that. That's like one of the worst things you do during a pandemic. Travel, can't do that. So like the two things that helped me through my, the loss of Molly, those were way off the table. And then even being in community and being with friends or something, well, that was on the table in a very small dose, right? You couldn't just go out and see people. So I was left with being stripped of my coping mechanisms. And so one of the other coping mechanisms I still sort of had was writing. And the thing I wanted to write about was the thing that I was experiencing, which was grief. And being the researcher that I am, I went to literature and I looked at grief literature and just started writing about this concept of joy and grief, and synthesizing the science, my own personal experiences, and my own abilities to synthesize literature as a researcher. Like I said, it's a tiny little book, and so it's digestible for people who are going through grief, because you can't really read a lot when you're super sad, and it just takes people through sort of things to consider. There's meditations in it that you can use, exercises that you can do if you find those fun, and otherwise it helped me, and I just hope it helps other people, without being really super prescriptive, like do it this way. It's not that kind of book.
Now I'm curious. During the pandemic, of course, you had travel issues and so on, and I appreciate that. I came back from New York on March 6th of 2020. As they closed down the city, I escaped and made it back to California. Can you travel and get anywhere near the same level of enjoyment by doing it virtually?
Travel virtually or karaoke virtually?
Well, we could talk about karaoke too, but I was thinking more of travel virtually.
Not for me. I'm going to say, I think other people, it might answer that differently. And I'm way too much of a people person, and way too much of a person that needs to absorb the ambiance and the feelings that I'm of the space around me, to really get the sense of I've been there without actually physically being there.
There is nothing like experiencing the ocean by being there. And I don't necessarily even mean walking into the ocean, although that for me becomes a part of it as well. But the sound is different. It is just a total different thing. Or going to a live performance and listening to the orchestra and or to a musical and listening and watching it live. The sound, the whole ambiance, although I can cope with doing things virtually, and I can watch movies virtually, well, or online or however, but there's nothing, absolutely nothing like being in a Broadway theater and observing a performance.
Yeah, you feel the energy.
That same kind of thing. You feel the energy. The sound is totally different, and I'm sure that the sight is as well. We went to see Lion King soon after it came out, and my brother-in-law, his wife, and their daughter, 3 years old, were visiting us, and a friend of his knew one of the actors and got us into The Lion King. And Karen was telling me, my wife, was we were watching it, she said, you really forget about the puppets. You just see the animals and you forget that it's people behind them. And then after the show, we got to go backstage and meet several of the actors, and I actually got to look at a couple of the puppets. And although I experienced it obviously different than she did and the others, I understood what they were saying, but there is just nothing like the energy of being in a live performance or in a situation. So I think you can see a lot by traveling virtually, but it is still not the same as being there.
Yes. I mean, I think it's better than not doing anything and seeing the same four walls or one block or whatever of where you're situated. And for me, it's not the same. And but I don't want to take away the experience if other people have that experience it differently.
Well, the other part about it is as virtual reality improves, I wonder how much that will affect our ability to maybe have a better experience. Don't know the answer to that yet. We're too near the beginning of that whole process, though, to really know.
Yeah, it is interesting because buildings maybe, but again, like if you're looking for the people energy, you're still not going to be able to get that. But if you want to look at a castle or a temple or something like that and just see it and be immersed.
Even people, maybe you can. Again, it depends on how good and effective the virtual reality is, how good the sound is, how good every aspect of it is. But that's something that only time is going to really tell. But I suspect there'll always be something that is hard to replicate in a virtual reality mode as opposed to actually being there. And that's part of the fun. And even if you get all the same sensations, going somewhere, you still know you're there, which is just in of itself kind of fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this has been really a lot of fun to do. I've enjoyed it. If tell us where people can get your books and the names of the books again, and how could they reach out to you if they want to learn more about you? If you're doing consulting that may be relevant for people, how do they get to you and all that stuff?
Yeah. So let's see. I'm like now trying to figure out which hat for which contact. LinkedIn's probably the easiest for consulting and things like that, or just being in touch. And my two books are One Nation Under Song and Find Your Song, and they are both on Amazon. And my publisher went under when I was during the pandemic, so they're currently in self-publish mode. And so other booksellers will pick them up because they're through Ingram Spark. So it's not just Amazon; it can be through a Barnes and Nobles online or a Powell's or something like that. And LinkedIn would probably be the easiest place.
So how do people find you on LinkedIn? How do people find you on LinkedIn?
Kris Gowen, KrisGowen.
that will find you. How about your book on sex education and so on? Is that still available?
I think it actually is. And also, again, at like sort of major retailer booksellers. That's through Rowman and Littlefield, and I think they still churn it out every once in a while. It's certainly not my retirement plan, but I think
Yeah,
it's still out there and available.
I hear you. Any more plans for writing that you're starting to think about at all?
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine, a colleague, and we're looking at doing a book about relationships. It's still in its infant stages, but really looking to critically examine the way that relationships are sort of performed, for lack of a better word, but done in the U.S. and other Western communities, as well as the importance of friendships and embedding that as well into the book. So it's very loose in its outline currently, so it's hard to talk about now, but
Yeah.
it's been fun to sort of know that there's another book in there that will eventually manifest.
Well, that's still a cool thing. And definitely please keep us in mind when you're getting closer to publishing it and so on, and it's defined more, or whenever you want to do it. We'd love you to come back and talk to us about that and other experiences that you're having, because clearly your experiences are valuable. And I think people will find listening to this a lot of fun. I know
Great.
I did, and I really enjoyed it. And I appreciate all the things you're saying.
Thank you so much. And yes, my co-author and I, we'll talk to you in a few months if we're hopefully moving along pretty well on it. I like the extra pressure of saying these words out loud and to motivate me to get a move on.
Got to start somewhere.
You do.
Well, thanks again for being here. And I want to thank you for listening to us tonight, this afternoon, or whenever it is, wherever you are. I really appreciate it. I hope that although we're not sitting right in front of you in person, that your virtual experience or your listening experience is valuable enough. We really enjoyed you being here, and thank you for your attention to us. And if you'd like to, I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts. Feel free to email me at michaelhi, MICHAELHI, at accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or go visit our podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. Definitely, please give us a 5-star rating. We really value the ratings, but I also want to hear your views and your opinions. And I would love it if you feel free to, and will feel free to email me. If you know of any other guests or other people that we ought to have on the podcast, please let me know, let them know, get us together. Always looking for opportunities like that. We met Kris through LinkedIn, and we're going to continue to search. And Kris, if you know anyone else that we should be talking with, please, we appreciate you letting them know about us as well. But most of all, thanks one last time for being here.
Thank you. It's been really fun.